Welcome to Church in the Round. We are doing a 5-week Lenten series of small group experience discussion groups of the Lord's Prayer. And we're getting started this week, week 1, right where the prayer starts. Each week we're going to be dividing up the prayer by its various phrases and assigning or sort of exploring a theme around each of those phrases. So we're going to begin this week where the prayer begins, which is, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. And the theme that we're looking to explore for this week is the theme of prayer as intimate and holy communication. So Matt, tell us a little bit about this theme. Get us started on what it is that means or why we would choose that for the beginning of this prayer.
Sure. Well, it reflects that prayer is communication. I think it's not just us sending one-directional notes off to God. It involves listening as much as it involves speaking. It involves trying to live in a sense of our connectivity to God and also to one another. Sometimes we pray alone, sometimes we pray in groups, but it's intimate. And so Jesus begins in good Jewish fashion addressing God as a parent, which might sound heavy-handed to some, but I think it's meant to be welcoming. And so there's this intimacy of a God who knows us and a God who's committed to our well-being. At the same time, that communication is also holy. So hallowed be thy name, which is really old-fashioned language that means literally, let your name be holy, which is God's business. I think God's name is holy from God's point of view, but it's an acknowledgement, like let God's name be respected as holy in this prayer, in my life. And so there's something deeply humbling at the same time that the intimacy is also taking place.
I think one of the things that we're hoping that groups will be talking about today is this question of how did you learn to pray, right? This art of intimate and holy communication. Who introduced you to that? So I want to start by asking you that question, Matt. Who taught you to pray?
I think maybe in the most formal way, I think I learned how to pray when I went to an Episcopal parochial school for 5th through 8th grade for a variety of reasons that was a very high church Episcopal parish. And so it was all out of a prayer book. It was words like thy and thine and hallowed. And so for me, prayer was always, you better know the right words. You better be in the right frame of mind. And so prayer was this lock that you had to open, and the key was the right language. And I think that really is something I've had to unlearn quite a bit. I'm happy to read other people's prayers. I'm happy to do more formal language when necessary, but I had to unlearn some of that and discover this is just me speaking in my own voice to a God who knows me and knows what I need better than perhaps I do.
Yeah.
How about yourself?
That's interesting. So I did not grow up in the church and did not go to an Episcopal day school.
You might count yourself lucky.
Yeah, my parents did, which is maybe why I didn't grow up in the church. I don't know. But I remember as a child sort of feeling as though I ought to be praying because the characters in the children's books I read were praying. You know, Anne of Green Gables was saying, now I lay me down to sleep at night. And I thought, gosh, these other kids are learning something that I'm not. So I remember for a while, sort of in childhood, listing family members that I was praying for as I would fall asleep. But that wasn't something that I had been sort of formally taught to do. In my family, mealtime grace happened only at like Thanksgiving or Christmas, and it was always a matter of some embarrassment. Somebody would sort of clear their throat very loudly and then sort of tap on a wine glass, and then say a one-liner of a grace. We all sort of wondered what we were doing, just because that wasn't our normal family practice. But I do remember the first time that I prayed, and it was at the suggestion of a friend. I was a first-year law student at the time, and somebody that I'd gotten to know from the divinity school suggested to me that I pray. I was trying to discern whether I should become a lawyer or sort of follow this strange inclination of becoming a minister and listening to that sense of call. And so she asked me, well, why don't you pray about it? And it had never occurred to me, even though I was trying to decide whether or not to be a pastor, to address God with that question. I thought so much about God and read so much about God and done so much sort of intellectual study. But that question of addressing God, and I remember, I think of that as the first time that I prayed, and I'm not sure that prayer has ever felt the same since then, because it was this incredibly powerful experience. What I asked for was help with with listening and trusting and believing. And in some way, addressing God that way for the first time is almost what called God into existence for me. If that makes, not that I created God, right? But that God in the second person was very different from God in the third person in terms of my own experience of God's reality. If that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah. I think one of the things that we're hoping groups will discuss is, what does the way that we address God say about who we understand God to be? I think that's...
Well, I think that's part of what's going on in the Lord's Prayer, because it's the words of the prayer, but it's also the larger narrative context, which is Jesus teaching his followers how to pray. And so we see it in Matthew chapter 6 and in Luke chapter 11. Matthew chapter 6, it's part of the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus is talking about public acts of piety. In Luke, his disciples watch him praying, and one of them says, "Teach us how to pray," which is a beautifully disarming question, isn't it? Teach us how to pray. We want to pray like you do. And here's Jesus who says, okay, and gives a prayer that's simple, that asks for basics, that every human being, I think, needs or participates in. And it's remarkably inviting, the narrative, when we imagine where the prayer comes from.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that as Jesus' response to that request from a disciple. It's interesting thinking about the devotional that goes along with this. We as a companion to this Church in the Round experience, the Congregational Care Team's daily Lenten devotional includes voices from around the congregation, and that first week, those devotions really are about how are we addressing God and where did we learn to do this. And I think there's so much richness in there.
Yeah, there's for this first week, a variety of different types of writing and ideas, but all of the authors view God as approachable.
Right, yeah.
Which is a remarkable basis for thinking about prayer in the first place.
Right. Which means maybe that lesson of Jesus is, here's a way to do it. Is maybe the church has listened.
Right.
Well, we hope that you have a wonderful and engaging discussion this morning, or this evening if you're in the Wednesday night group, and enjoy Church in the Round.